Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is Quick Opening Solutions and today we're taking a look at the Slav defense. Let's get into it. So first off, let's have a look at the fundamentals. The Slav defense comes onto the board after white plays d4, black plays d5, white plays c4, and black plays c6. And in this case, importantly, it's white's turn to move. So the first point we should think about is that white gets to choose what black is able to play in the Slav defense. So for us to have a quick opening solution, the easiest option is the exchange variation. We take CXD, black takes CXD, and now we have our standard structure in the exchange variation, an open C file, and symmetrical pawns. Here, very likely, we will play e3 at some point, black will play e6, and then we will have to play in this structure. Importantly, we will have a look later at a copycat style that black can play against us, and in that case we might be able to move this b pawn into the c6 square, making it a backwards pawn. Then the structure would look something like this, where we can insert e3 and e6, and we see that the b pawn has come onto the c6 square. We will touch on this again a little bit later. Let's take a look now at what the opening can look like. We play d4, black plays d5, we play c4, black plays c6, declining the queen's gambit and putting the Slav on the board. And here it's white's move and we can choose which Slav to play, so black does not have the choice and we can simply take CXD, they take CXD, and now we have the exchange Slav on the board as we saw in the fundamental structure. Now we have very natural development for all minor pieces, and black is not really able to limit. The only option they have is potentially to contest our bishops or to limit our light square bishops slightly with something like a6, and we will look at that shortly as well. But let's just continue in a standard fashion here. So knight c3, knight f6, we bring our dark square bishop out to f4, they bring out the other knight, we bring out our other knight, and here they close off with e6. And we will look at two other variations briefly, but here we can just continue with e3 as well. Now they might play something like bishop d6, challenging our dark square bishop, and please note that this is the good bishop for black, because their pawns are currently on light squares. So already, if we took this bishop, they would have a light square bishop that they have to make some plan with, and we would be slightly better for that. However, if you want to play a little bit more solid, what you can also do is you can just play bishop g3, a little bit like a London, and just leave the bishop there. Every time they take, it doesn't matter when, you can just take with the h-pawn and just move on with your life. So here, for instance, they castle, we bring our light square bishop onto its own active diagonal, they take, we take with the h-pawn, and in that situation we have a lot of pressure on their h-pawn. Now we have the open file and the open bishop. It is possible for us to, for instance, consider castling long, but it's unnecessary. We will be able to play for a win still, even if we don't. So, for instance, we just castle here, and our development is complete, all our minor pieces are out, our light square bishop is active, their light square bishop is inactive, and we have a clear advantage coming out of the opening, being the aggressor. Now, if there's two other variations I want to show, I think it would be the ones where instead of e6, black decides to play a6. This doesn't really change our plans too much though. We close off our light square bishop, our dark square bishop. They bring out their light square bishop and we can just oppose. So now the knight is no longer pinned. They close off and we castle, and once again we have finished our development. They can bring out their dark square bishop. I've already said you're welcome to take, you're welcome to drop it back. For consistency, let's drop our bishop back, and if they ever take, we will just take with the h-pawn. And in this situation, we can also eventually take if we want to, and play up with the h3 if we want to oppose this light square bishop. We could also jump our knight out the way and just force into trade if we decide that's what we want to do. The other variation that I think we should have a look at briefly is if they copy us. So in this position, black is able to play bishop f5. And bishop f5 could be a dangerous move for them, but we're not going to try and contest the potential weakness on b7 directly. We're just going to continue because the copycat style is always worse for black if they continue it too long. So e3, e6, and here we can play out bishop b5, pinning that knight to the queen. If they, for instance, try to do the same, we can now bring up our own queen. This is slightly different from the other variations, but importantly now, we're attacking this, and this knight is pinned, so they probably have to decide if they want a castle or take our knight directly. After they do that, we can now take their knight, and now we have transformed the structure and put their b-pawn on c6, and we will have a half-open file against a backwards pawn that we can pressure almost indefinitely in the game. If they take back, we take with our queen, and therefore they do not have the same on our side of the board. And this is the small imbalance that we can play for into the middle game as well. Now we've reached the middle game. Now what? We will look at a few variations, but the key point here is that because we're white, we have the initiative. We are going to keep putting pressure on the queen side. We're going to use our rooks on the c file. We're going to use our knight to try and get into the c5 square. Our light square bishop is going to stay here very active. And if we ever maybe want to, we can even trade it off for their knight if it jumps here. And our kingside knight could go to e5 or could come back to d2 to cover the square, or even come across as a second knight to c5 if we trade our other knight off. So as an example line here, they might play a6 to cover the b5 square. Importantly, after rook ac1, they can't play b5 themselves because we will take the pawn and then take the knight. So maybe they develop their light square bishop, and now we continue. Rook over, knight into c5. They can counterattack with something like knight b4, but we don't have to give them the satisfaction of trading everything off equally. We can keep our light square bishop with bishop b1, protecting the a2 square, and after they take our knight, we can take the bishop. Now we've developed our queen with tempo on the knight, which means again we keep trading off a little bit of advantage, a little bit of something in each move. The knight probably goes back, and now we're going to double up, bring our light square bishop in, and we can continue putting a little bit more extra pressure. So for instance, bring our light square bishop in with bishop d3, and from here we can continue maybe trying to put pressure on the b pawn, maybe trying to bring our other knight across to play into the c5 square again with the second knight. And black is just always struggling. You can see they do not have a lot of space. If they ever try and play b5 right now, the a pawn will hang. So we are the ones in control, and we can continue to try and slowly increase the pressure and turn the screws on the black position. If they ever jump in the knight to e4, for instance, just so you know, we don't have to worry about that. This knight we're happy to take, because this is one more piece that they cannot get into the game. And after that, we can play our knight back. We can get this knight over to the c5 square, second knight. We can take this pawn if they let us. We can even consider putting our knight into the e5 square if we want to trade it off for this one later in the game. The other middle game position we reach after black plays a6, which stops our bishop so we cannot transform the structure, but we already know how we're going to develop, so I'm just going to put that on the board quickly. And here, after we get to this position, we have the same plan again. We bring a rook over, and we're going to try and rump a knight into c5. So for instance, they could bring their own rook over. Here comes our knight, and here they can just exchange our dark square bishop, because our dark square bishop is going to cause problems for them looking at their queen side. We take back with the h-pawn as always, and after that they can jump something like knight e4. We can jump our knight in anyway, and we can trade off, and we still have a rook on this file. And importantly, if they try to jump the knight, we can trade off their rook, because they have to take with their queen, and we can play queen d2 and again take control of the file. Or if they play something like queen e7, we can play queen d2 anyway, because we're bringing our rooks onto the c file, and we continue to play for this aggression and this pressure. The bishop over here can get traded off as well at any time that we wanted to, with something like knight h2 as well, or even trying to jump our knight to another square. But currently all we're trying to do is to get all our pieces focused on the correct side of the board. The last middle game position we will just quickly take a look at is if black continued with that copycat style. And in this case, we know we're going to try and transform the structure by taking the knight with our light square bishop. So we play e3, and I'll just put the board quickly the way we got here. So we take, they take, we take with our queen, they take with their pawn, and this is really where we get into the middle game, because now we're looking to push onto this backward c-pawn, and we know that our dark square bishop is covering the b8 square, so their rooks can't really get onto the b file. Even if it could though, we had b3, because this is not a backwards pawn right now. So the game might continue something after we castle like this. Queen b6. Now we play knight e5, putting extra pressure on that pawn. They defend it with their f-rook. Now we also attack it again with our f-rook. And after they play knight e4 now, we can't take because they will take our queen with the rook. But we can put our queen on a3, which gives us a little bit of extra access. Also defends the b pawn, and we can slowly double up here on the c file if we still want to. If they, for instance, can get uncomfortable and decide to push our knight away, it's very easy for us to now jump the knight in either direction, although I suggest d7 because it comes with tempo against the queen, back all the way to the c5 square, and if they take, we take with our rook, and we continue to have this ongoing pressure against this backwards pawn. We can bring our other rook into the game here with rook c1. Our dark bishop is still on the board. If they decide to break in the center, the game will change, but we will continue to have this half-open file against the weak c-pawn that they have, and we can play for advantage in that case. So a note on move orders. The Slav isn't a very complicated position to get to. However, there are 2 or 3 that we can get there, so let's just have a quick look here. The one we already know is d4, d5, c4, and c6. However, it is obviously possible for black to play c6 first, kind of like a Karo Khan against the e4 opening, and after c4 they play d5 anyway. There's also the option for them to actually defend the pawn like a Queen's Gambit declined. So here after c4 they play e6 for instance, and then after knights f3, if they ever play c6 and we take, and they take back with the c-pawn, it's the same structure again. However, in this case, they've also committed to the more passive line where they put the e6 pawn on the board first and their light square bishop is trapped in, which we've already looked at in the opening and middle game as well. A last few notes then before we close off. In this position is the one where we know black can play a6 or e6 or bishop f5, but there are 2 other moves for us just to be aware of and not to get scared. The first one is that they can play knight h5 in certain positions, and they can hit our dark square bishop because we're trying to put it outside the pawn chain, which makes it slightly vulnerable to this knight jump. This is not really something we have to be too concerned about, and you can actually just keep the same pattern in your head. Bishop g3, let them take with the h-pawn, and from there after we develop, the game is still perfectly fine. The reason that black might play bishop e7 here is because the other diagonal is now completely blocked off for them, so they might try to do something different, but we are still perfectly fine. We can still castle, we can still play for a perfectly nimble game. We also have this pressure on the h file that we originally had, so they'd have to continue with something like knight h6. And here we can continue in various ways, but we don't have to vary our structure. We can still just castle and play on the queen side if we want to. The other move I want to note is something like queen b6 early on here, instead of playing a standard move. This looks a little bit scary because with our dark square bishop coming out, our b pawn is weak, but this is actually a poison pawn, and if black takes it, as in many variations where black takes on b2 with the queen, they either have to get into a draw or the queen hangs. In this case, the queen hangs. We play a3, and after this we can actually continue our plan very naturally because they cannot take the b-pawn. If they do take the b-pawn, there's 3 moves you have to remember. You have to remember knight a4, leaving only the b5 square for the queen. Then you have to remember a slightly passive move, bishop back to d2, because now the queen can't go anywhere and we're threatening e3 winning it. They have to go queen a6 so that after e3 they have b5, but now we get knight c5 in, which we've wanted all along in all of the variations anyway, and after the queen goes to b6, the only square is free in, we have a4 breaking down the structure. Black is underdeveloped. Black's queen is completely in the wrong position. The rook will hang if they try to defend the pawn with another pawn, and definitely white has just got a clear advantage here. So do not be scared about this or the other move where black just variates from a standard opening. There are reasons that they should not be able to do that without getting punished or just wasting them time a little bit. And that's it. That is a quick opening solution to the entire Slav because white gets to choose the variation. Something to note here, although some openings have an opening reputation as being very drawish, for instance, if you look at the actual stats of public play at any level below master, the draws do not happen nearly as much. It's not full games of theory, and white still has a good chance to win. In 2024, for instance, looking at public games, I can see that white still won about 50% of the exchange Slavs, so don't get discouraged by the reputations. Play a solid opening and have a good game. See you next time. Bye bye.